I'm not going to lie, I wasn't completely sold on Forspoken the first time I tried it out. I found the dialogue a bit too annoying, the combat menu too convoluted, and the open world didn't impress. Well, I spent close to 50 hours with it over the past week, and I'm glad to say that I was wrong on that, as this proved to be one of the most fun games I played over the past year. Forspoken is fast-paced, satisfyingly impactful, and it does many things right, just how it does many things wrong, and there's a few key aspects that prove to be a bit of a letdown for me personally. Also, a big thanks to Square Enix for kindly providing me with an early code so that I can post this review. Now, the game's story begins with a pretty basic premise that I'm sure you've seen many times before in the other world or isekai genres. Our main character, who goes by the name of Frey, yeah, her life in New York City sucks basically, as she's all alone, seemingly abandoned by her parents at birth, with a court hearing due to some of her past misdeeds. Long story short, she's given a second chance, and this is where you kinda pick off the controls and have a first tour around New York City. Or well, a tiny fraction of it, like just a few building blocks on the way to Frey's apartment, because this is clearly not the main focus of the game. You do come back to this later, and I definitely commend them for the effort, but it doesn't take too long until an inexplicable event transports us to the new world, the one called Athia. Unfortunately for Frey, this world, while it does look lush, strange, and at times even awe-inspiring, it proves to be in an even greater peril than the one she left behind. The last remnants of humanity are all left in one single city, the outside world is not safe either, and if that wasn't enough, Athia is ruled by the so-called Tantas, all-powerful demigods that themselves have succumbed to madness. And the cuff, a magical vambrance that permanently attaches to, well, her arm, can speak to Frey and even gives her all her powers. Now, I will just say this straight up, but Frey and Cuff's initial dynamic did not click with me, as I found most of their interactions and dialogues early on quite annoying. Probably because of Frey's incessant complaining, cursing when the situation didn't call for it, and just a lot of these interactions felt a little bit forced. Luckily, the game does give you an option to reduce the frequency of some of those dialogues, so at least that's a helpful change. That being said, if you do manage to go past the first starting chapters, the story does become a bit better as more characters get introduced and you learn more about the problems they are currently facing. It took me roughly 20 hours and a bit to finish the main story, including with quite a bit of exploration, which is pretty standard these days, nothing truly groundbreaking here, but the rest of it comes in the form of the stuff you can do out in the open world. I will admit, however, that the ending had a nice twist that I personally did not see coming, so that was one of the most memorable things from the story that at least were left with me. The gameplay, on the other hand, is where Forspoken truly shines, and it's probably the reason why you'll even want to consider it. Just everything about the spells, how impactful they feel, the ease of which you soar through the vast lands of Athia, all are done just so right. Forspoken has by far the best reversal mechanics since the more acrobatic Spider-Man games, and they've done it in a way that makes you feel you become more powerful as the game goes on. There are cool new abilities that let you better traverse the environments in cool unique ways, and every single one of them was worth pursuing. What I liked most is that lacking some of them at the start does not feel like a limitation, but rather something that you want to naturally build upon. It was always nice to know that I can move however I want right from the start, and always a surprise to see new traversal skills unlocked that let me do even crazier things than before. There were many points of interest I wanted to visit in inaccessible areas, but it never felt restrictive, rather something I knew I'd want to come back later and visit with the appropriate upgrade. Furthermore, Forspoken provides you all the tools needed to never stop moving, assuming of course you're willing to upgrade some of them. Combat is probably even better, but it does take some time before it truly clicks. It might look like it's convoluted in some of these shots, and the game definitely makes use of a lot of button combinations to cast different spells and other cool things, but I promise you it all starts making sense and it kind of becomes intuitive as you progress at least like 5 to 10 hours into it. There are 4 different spell categories you get from the main story bosses, each with sub-skills and upgrades to make you a lot stronger. Later, and once you unlock the new stuff, the game encourages you to actually switch between them as often as you can for maximum impact. And speaking of impact, the feedback you get on every single one of these skills is truly astounding. From the sound, enemy reactions, screen effects, it all blends nicely into a system designed to make you feel like a demigod yourself. The character progression is further facilitated via items like necklaces, cloaks, and nails. And yeah, they kind of feel girly at times, but it didn't feel like they were super necessary to feel strong right away. Don't get me wrong, there are still many reasons to always pursue for new items that I'll explain in my beginner's guide, but just like in the case of the traversal, it feels like a natural extra on top rather than a restriction. Maybe my only complaint here is that at times the items you see visually on Frey are not as important as the stats that you can actually apply on them. Crafting lets you max out almost any piece of gear and apply any unlocked effects, so endgame wise your choice will mostly boil down to aesthetics. To support such fast movement controls, obviously Forspoken needed a big enough map to accommodate, which it does, but not without some drawbacks. The main one is some of this vastness comes at the cost of detail. The game looks good, it definitely does, but I feel the bar has been set so high with the likes of Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon Forbidden West that at times it makes Forspoken feel like it's struggling to hold up. Althea is split into 4 different zones, each made out of dozens of subzones that all have different themes, from lush forests and green open fields to sizzling deserts, volcanic fortresses, all the way to the more strange and broken endgame ones. Despite its size, fast traveling from one end of the world to another is almost instantaneous on the PlayStation 5 version that I played on. There are still some slight loading screens, like when going in or out of the main city or inside some of its buildings, but out in the open world it's very fast, you can travel instantaneously, and more important, you can travel seamlessly on foot between any of these zones, except when the story doesn't let you. Performance-wise, there are options for a ray tracing, high quality, and a performance mode, but personally I couldn't go with anything but the performance one. I just don't think, at least on the PlayStation, anything below 60 FPS is a sacrifice I'd be willing to make for such a fast-paced game. Yes, the higher you go, the better the draw distance, resolution, and reflections are going to be, but it comes at a hefty price you have to pay in much lower and unstable frame rates. Luckily, in between this vastness, there are hundreds of big and small activities to take part in, and for the most part, they all are rewarding in some kind of way. You can find remnants of old human settlements, random hordes of zombies or creatures, mutant mini-bosses, trial challenges, fortresses, and way more. All which, strangely enough, immediately make their drops visible on the map even if you did not necessarily enter that place just yet. So much so that many times it felt that it kind of ruins the surprise having all of this information displayed at all times. It's certainly useful to know exactly what you get, but maybe a bit of secrecy could have done wonders. Forspoken also features many dungeon-style underground areas in the form of these locked labyrinths. My problem with them is that they all literally, actually scratch that, are literally the same. It's downright hilarious really, basically a tunnel with rooms filled with enemies, a final boss at the end, and occasionally extra side areas that are just there for a quick distraction. The only thing that changes to them is the color depending which zone you are in, and maybe the enemies, but that's about it. As great as they are for the extra boss fights and the gear, they are quite a big of a letdown for me personally because they are just so damn similar. And this is a recurring theme I unfortunately noticed throughout Forspoken in almost all of its aspects, that a lot of what you do in there is just repetitive. It's always going in a new area, always selecting from the same handful of objectives. You just do it a bit better every single time because you progress and get new skills. Again, combat and traversal fully carry this game here too. It keeps things fresh by feeling addictive every time you chase a new encounter. Even if it's the same encounter you did thousands of times before, it does indeed feel satisfying to just go in and test your new skills. There are, however, several big human settlements on the scale of cities and a lot more smaller abandoned ones in the wild, but only one of them is actually inhabited by human civilization, which is Sepal. As far as hubs go, it's pretty okay, decent I guess. There is a lower and an upper class area with different themes going on. You also get access to main and side quests here mainly, and also your very own house. Sepal also suffers changes as you go through the story, and the game really tries to give you this feeling that there is an urgency in completing some of its side quests. Though I think, again, like in the case of the Labyrinth dungeons, the execution just wasn't up to par. For some reason, the game has a big fixation with cats, so a lot of the side missions and early interactions have a lot of cat chase scenes around Sepal. And even the ones that do involve humans feel like plain fetch quests that don't add too much to the story, well, besides a few plot points. The rewards are there, but the means in which you get them are a bit dull. Also, forget about branching narrative or dialogue options, as these are minimal. At most, the game uses dialogues to inquire or find more about the lore rather than choose between different outcomes. Also, for some reason, the game doesn't let you move your character during most of these dialogues, which is really annoying because you're kind of stuck looking at the screen and you're really not interested in many of these dialogues. There were many other awkward decisions I found with Forspoken, but maybe not all of them were taken in a bad way. It definitely feels like it's trying to give something to everyone, though in doing so, it ends up with strange design decisions or tries to cram way too many things into your game time just so that it feels bigger. That being said, here is my final verdict. On the plus side, the game is very fun to play, the combat is satisfying and impactful, traversal is by far its best feature, and the progression system is just okay. Cons-wise, the game features a mediocre story at best, probably the most unlikable main character, it feels way too repetitive at times, and the graphics fail to impress. Depending which one of these matter the most to you will influence if you should try the game or not. For me, it proved to be a lot of fun, so I'm willing to give it a second chance, but if you're on a tight budget, it might make more sense to maybe wait for a discount. This is it, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.